The easiest way to create a world is to start with your environment. In this situation, which kind of structure do you need? You need a world map. Now, how do you build this world map? You want to start by considering two elements. First, the locations, and second, the situation. You want to consider these two kind of elements in synergy, because all the events in your stories, all the events in your world will happen in a specific location, and you want to be able to make use of the specificity of these locations in order to make your story more specific. Now, defining the loci, or the essential location in your world, which will be grouped under 4 categories: webs, entertainment, health and food, and safety, is critical very early in the story. You can name them as early as your first chapter. You do not need to visit them. Just indicate that these locations exist by presenting a specific character, by building a certain topic, a certain conversation. You can name them, you can mention them, you can indicate them through other elements. They do not have to be named directly. You want to put in your world map, or at least to indicate as a note for you later in your story, the kind of inhabitants in each different location. You want to take into consideration the synergy between the different type of inhabitants in every specific zone. Here being animals and vegetables, but we're gonna separate peoples and animals because you'll probably define different degree of intelligence and different degree of sapience between your different species. The third factor you want to consider are the resources. Now, resources are mainly bound to geography, but they could be made by your species, they could be built by your species, and therefore the species themselves can be treated as resources or what they build. Now, when it comes to resources, they have the function to support the functionment of your world. Therefore, installing early a logic of sustainability and balance, which will be supported by the logic of synergy between the different inhabitants in a specific environment, is essential. You do not have to overemphasize it, just mention it. Mention that some species, a group of 2, 3, or 4 species which evolve through a similar territory are growing together. There's a codependency between these species. Therefore, eliminating one will have an impact on others. Finally, you want to consider the goals of your main characters. Now, we'll function with the 4 main characters logic: the rival, enticer, advisor, and arbiter, but you can have more than 4. Now, when it comes to comparing core location and essential locations, the essential locations and the core location are the same places. On your world map, they will be the same location. It's a matter of terminology here. Essential mean that the location is essential in your world. For example, an hospital, a clinic would be essential to heal the inhabitants of your world, same thing for a hotel. Whereas this very same location may serve as an element in your story. Maybe, for example, your characters have established this hospital, this clinic, this hotel as a base, and they're getting back there in moments of comfort, moments of rest. Now imagine later in the story, this place gets destroyed. Now you can verify the value as a core location of this environment in your story, because your characters have formed an attachment, and likely your public and you as well have formed a form of attachment with this location, which make it a core location. So, essential location in the world, core location in the story. There's a last part in matter of terminology when it comes to separating, creating an element in your world and creating an element in your story. Generally, locations in your world will be called landmarks. They're essential in your world and they're easy to repair on a map. When it comes to story, the term milestones will be more appropriate because you have a more chronological approach now. You have a more chronologically linear approach since your story is linear most of the time. So, landmarks and milestones. As we create our world, we want to place our four main types of location in order to indicate to our characters and our public where they need to go and why they need to go to this location. In most cases, you want to start with webs. Webs regroup every kind of infrastructure which is linked to communication, energy, water, and commutation in a general sense. Here on this map will essentially indicate ports, harbors, and markets. The three other kind of location will be generated simultaneously. So the locations in the entertainment category, which will group festivals, places, main squares, arenas, coliseum, restaurants, theaters, playgrounds. The safety kind of infrastructure, which will correspond to most constructions, and namely the building for the administration and the security companies. Finally, the health type of infrastructure, which will regroup the water web, the some markets, the clinics and the laboratories will all be placed simultaneously. They should be built in a concomitant manner because they're all codependent, contrary to the web, which would be created beforehand. Now, on this specific map, we can remark that most of this map depends on fishing and trading. So the ports, the harbors, will be plentiful. We have 7 ports here in this map, and most of them are directly linked to each other with roads. Now, each harbor here, each port, is linked to a location, a place named in purple. Most of these places in purple, and we'll see that's the same logic will apply to all of our maps here. Most locations in purple will be cities, not just town, not just small settlement, but cities. The purple here indicates a certain degree of fortification and certain amount of security and safety infrastructure, which should ensure the safety of a larger population. We can remark that we also have 2 large places in green, and both of these places are entertainment type of location. So here, since they're concentrated, they will regroup most of the entertainment types of spaces. For example, the one in light green is a large complex. You can compare it to a mall, for example, which will regroup restaurant, multiple theaters, multiple playground, inner parks also, for example, and maybe some other places for festivals and celebrations. The smaller one in dark green would have the same kind of infrastructure, but let's suppose it's an arena. Now, why would that be an arena, and why would we create a different kind of infrastructure contrary to the one in light green? Now, you may notice that the different territories on this map have different colors. For example, the one in the middle is dark green, whereas the one at the bottom is light green. Now, these 2 territories have different colors to facilitate the reading of the map. Now, you can think that these 2 territories are inhabited by 2 different types of population, and it would be a fair assumption. It's a way to interpret this map. Different colors for the different territories, so it's easier to read the map, really. So, and same thing for the entertainment spaces here. So the one in light green, let's say it's a mall, whereas the one in dark green here is an arena. This will structurally display that we have different kind of populations here, and they consider entertainment in a very different manner. Now, for the ports themselves and for the market themselves, what could we do to distinguish these two types of population? Now, let's say we have inner markets here, and one of the most common goods traded here are jewels. Now, this population may have a form of interest in jewels. They may have a form of interest in non-essential, at least in the traditional way, goods. But let's say this territory, since it seems to be larger right now, is also a territory which has a lot of plains and can do also a lot of catering, and they also export, well, let's say sheep. Now we have some specific goods that this territory can export, and on the contrary, this other territory, it seems much smaller. So let's say they can only they export some kind of fishery, let's say mackerel. Just a moment here, and they can also do some catering, but with smaller animals. So let's say they can have chicken, and they can export chicken, but also eggs. So we have these different kind of goods, this different kind of material that these two territories can export or import. Let's say we have some form of small bushes here, specific to the region in the middle, so we can export certain fruits, maybe some berries. And here you start to develop the characteristics of each region. Maybe they have access to a certain kind of technology here. They have access to certain kind of balms that can heal certain wounds, very specific wounds that, let's say, things essential for the skin, essential for the bones, maybe also. Whereas in this other world, or no, let's say in this other city, the people of this city have developed a specific technology when it comes to eye correction. No, and they have this specific knowledge, which would be considered maybe much more advanced than the one of the skin, the bone. And in this other territory, they have something to fortify muscle growth. So all of these territories have specific goods, they have specific resources, which is directly dependent on the inhabitants of each territory, that they can export, that they can exploit, that they can use. So that's our first constat here. Most territories will be exploited by your organizations, and sometimes the very exploitation of the territory and the resources is the goal of the organization. It may only be a mean, but sometimes it will be the goal. Now let's look at another side of this planet with this large territory in gray that we didn't mention until now. The territory and the different location placed on it have a different pattern, a different structure from what we saw before. First, we don't seem to have any visible roads. Now, why is that? You can constate that most location in orange, in red. So the web of communication in this territory is sparsely spread. Now, why don't we have any visible roads? Well, maybe the inhabitants of this territory have developed a technology which does not necessitate land commuting. So maybe they have flying devices. Now, you can also see that and because this territory is larger than the other two, you can see that more bases, more dots, more webs, more nodes have been placed on this map, and their size varied much more. You have very small nodes, you have very large nodes, and you can even realize that most of these nodes are placed in the same location. For example, in the top right corner, you have a blue node on top of a purple node. Now, purple still significant the same thing as on the other two maps. All the zones in purple are secured zone. They're settlements. There are large settlements here. It's difficult to say if there are cities or if there are something smaller, since there are so many of them compared to the other two maps. But we know that there are settlements, and there are fortified settlements. Now, for the green, we only have two locations in green, and they look smaller than on the other two maps. That's an important indication as well, because on the other two maps, all the entertainment was focused on one specific point. You know, the larger cities, the capitals, were regrouping all the entertainment in one large area. Here we have two, and they're smaller. Now, can we conclude that we have two capitals, or at least two more important cities? Well, that would be a fair assumption as well. But now, why is one of them so remote from what seems to be the core of this map? Because at the bottom of this map, we seem to have a lake, or at least a large body of water, which finish into multiple rivers, and along these rivers there seems to be after a lot of vegetation and multiple cities or multiple settlements. Now, why are there multiple locations, why are there multiple settlements so far remote from what seems to be the core of this territory, of this country, maybe, if it's united? Well, we may consider that this population is trying to establish multiple colonies, which would be explaining why there are so many communication nodes. These people, these inhabitants, are explorers. They are more likely to explore their territory than the other two kind. Now, we may realize that there's a difference when it comes to the blue used here. You know, the blue on the other map was cyan or ocean blue. Here it's indigo, which indicates us that there's a difference in terms of healthcare technology with these people. Now, if we were to place some resources on this map, what would there be on these different territories? Now, for the most remote territories, what can we think about these remote territories? They can be mines, actually, so there can be different kind of ore in these different territories. Now, which kind of ore? Well, it can be fuel, it can be precious metals. Let's say we have general ore for the moment. So that's the most remote locations. Now, what about these other smaller ones? Well, we can imagine that there are farms. Why not? You know, we have a farm here. It's more likely that farms are installed along the river, but let's suppose we have farms in every single small location. Now, what about this one? This one looks like a colony as well, and why is it so remote? Well, why is it so remote? Knowing that we have a large installation, a large settlement here. So it's, let's say that this spot in the middle was the original core of this nation. No, these people started here, maybe up to there. You know, that's their original core. That's where they started when they moved to establish this colony. Why did they move to this territory? There must be an essential resource here. Maybe they only want to split. Maybe there was an internal dissension which forced a part of the population to move. in such great number. But let's say they're not outcast. Let's say they moved because there was another resource here. We have to think about this resource. It can be the source, the material. Let's say it's not mineral this time, but let's say it's organic. Let's say it's a specific plant. Let's invent a species of plant which would allow them to fuel their flying vehicles. Now let's start with a plant which exists, and you have multiple plants that are already used as a biomass for fuel. Well, let's start with Camellia crapneliana. There's a flower called Camellia crapneliana, which is a type of camellia. Now let's try to simplify that with Camellia liana. And we'll add a second L in the beginning to make it. Okay. Now let's suppose that this region is the region where this plant is endemic. Now, why would you want to install your entire city in this region? Because this plant is the plant which is used as a primary factor in order to, well, fuel the vehicles, the flying vehicles we have. Now, for the facility in Indigo. Now, let's support we have this plant, this camellia, and this camellia is likely to have been overexploited. Now, they need the oil, but the original material has been tapped into too much, and they'll need to synthesize it. So we have laboratories here, all the labs in Go, which are supposed to produce, to synthesize extract of the flower. Now, why place these different laboratories in such disparate location? Well, for the first one, obviously it should be placed here because it's the birthplace of the plant. Now, for the second one, that's the originating bed of this population, so it's easy, so they always have a lot of infrastructure here. Now, what about this one, which is far remote? Well, maybe as these inhabitants exploit this plant, they discover that it grows better, or the synthesis of the oil is easier in colder temperature. So this environment here is ideal to synthesize the plant. The change of temperature here will act as a catalyst and augment the quality of the oil. Now, same logic for this one. Maybe the plant also has another property which make it usable not only as a fuel for the vehicle, but also as another form of balm. Maybe this plant also allows them to heal themselves. Now, how does it help them to heal themselves? Well, we have to think about the vehicle now. What's the common traits between the vehicle and the population itself? Has the vehicle been created after the population's anatomy, for example, maybe, which is why they could use the balm of the camellia in order to heal themselves, in order to heal, to maybe prolong their lifespan. All of that is left to you. You may want to generate as much synergy as you can between a people, her creation, and her way of life. Because if you can make every invention of a specific people as useful as possible, the story becomes much more enjoyable. The story becomes much more integrated into the world it has been built for. This planet displays 4 main land masses. Now, for this last part, let's take a look at the 2 remaining land masses. The one at the bottom in light green, and the one at the top in darker green. Now, the territory in light green, we've already presented half of it. It's a territory which produces multiple kinds of fish, multiple kinds of poultry, eggs as well, and which seems in its health system to be focused on muscle growth. That's the information we have till now. Now, if we look at this map and at the opposition between this territory in light green and the territory in the darker green that we haven't presented yet, what can we see? Well, first, we have ramparts. We have a collection of walls in purple, which seems to be pointed directly at the territory in dark green, indicated that a potential threat could come from this territory. But we can also see that a harbor has been built in this territory. So a harbor which is most likely linked to all this. Now, was this harbor built by the inhabitant of the land in darker green or by the inhabitant of the land in light green? Well, it's up to you to choose. But let's say it has been built by the inhabitant of the territory in light green. This would be a point of entry from this territory to the other one. So let's suppose that this territory hasn't been explored yet. There seems to be some knowledge of it, which would explain all these walls. Now let's try to present this other side of the territory in light green, because it seems to be different from the territory in light green that we've seen on the other map. On the other map, for example, we didn't have laboratories. We didn't have these dots in indigo. Now, what are they about? And what is their purpose? Well, their purpose in most cases will be chemical and industrial exploitation. So let's say we have a specific plant on this part of the map that we're likely to exploit. Well, let's take a plant called Mesua Thera. We have a tree here. A tree whose wood is heavy, hard, thick. Maybe this wood has been used in order to build these walls. Now, how else would the inhabitant of this world exploit this wall? Well, it appears that this plant, other than having a very strong wood, has also a fruit, or excuse me, the seed of the fruit is gorged with oil. Now, this oil could be used to fuel their ships. Maybe the people in the light green territory have a more advanced technology when it comes to navigation than the people in dark green that we've seen in the first map. Because now we have a large amount of harbor in this territory in light green. It's 6 harbor as of now. So now let's suppose that we have other industrial installation. For example, the one here would be where the boats are built, and they are not just boats using a simple sailing technology. Maybe they are boats with engines. Now we have a last exploitation factory, a last factory, a last laboratory. Maybe in this laboratory, it's actually the place where the oil is refined in order to be transported here. So we have a direct road, a direct link between these three laboratories. Here we take the wood and we build the walls. Here we extract the oil in order to get it there. Now there's different elements, there's different synergies between the factories. Could be the main characteristic of this land, but what else could we have? Let's say we have other resources here that are not available on the other side of the territory. Well, let's say, for example, that the population on one side of the light green territory and the population on the other side of the light green territory are really different. Let's say this one care for frivolities and they have a certain type of glass which allow them to create very resistant mirrors. Well, let's put it just next to them as well. So they have a glass, a very specific glass, which allows them to create, well, glasses, but also mirrors, very resistant glasses and mirrors, which are one of the main exportation, well, one of the main goods that they export. And let's say on this small island, they have another type of animal. Let's say we have sharks. Maybe they can exploit snakes. Well, multiple kind of marine and forest and jungle animal that they, well, eat, that they sell. Even alive, maybe they don't eat animals at all. Maybe they just sell living animals as pets or as a mean of defense, which is why they're selling snakes and sharks. So that's another way to characterize these people. So far we have at least 3 different types of population on this planet, and now remains this unexplored territory. Now, just as a pointer for this last territory, we didn't place anything on this territory because we want you to complete it. Let's try to imagine what's there. First, it doesn't seem that there's anything on the coast, where we've seen that for at least 2 out of 3 other territories, the coast has been fully exploited. Now, we can assume that this population doesn't live on the coast, much like the inhabitants of the land in gray, which do not live on the coast, as we can see on the first map. You see the coast of the land in gray has not been occupied at all. So we can assume that these people have no interest into living on the coast. If we try to imagine what's inside this territory, maybe it's a more mountainy territory. Maybe there are more forests, and these people live in these forests. And in these forests we have ponds, we have creeks, we have glades, we have different sources of water, rivers, so we don't need to get to the sea. Now let's look at the shape of this territory. If we look at what we have very little visual information, meaning that this territory may not be habited by sentient beings, or at least it is not as of now, but it may have been. Now, who could have been on this territory? Who may be on this territory right now, and why aren't they using their coastal reef, which seems so regular, so easy to navigate? Why don't they use it if there are people there? If you can answer this question, you have a country ready for you to write your next story. Suggest us the content you need. This channel is made for you.